Hello, sports fans. Welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my Week 9 college football rankings. So we'll start off by briefly recapping my rankings from Week 8 and what those teams did last week. Last week at number 10, I had Georgia. They beat Ole Miss 43-35. Ninth, I had LSU. They lost to Vanderbilt 31-24. Eighth was Oregon. They destroyed Rutgers 56-10. Seventh, I had Texas Tech. They lost to Arizona State 26-22. Sixth was Alabama. They easily beat Tennessee 37-20. Fifth, I had Texas A&M. They defeated Arkansas 45-42. Fourth was Ole Miss. They lost to Georgia 43-35. Third was Indiana. They easily beat Michigan State 38-13. Second was Miami. They were upset by Louisville, losing 24-21. And number one, I had Ohio State, and they destroyed Wisconsin 34-0. But getting into this week's rankings, beginning things at number 10, I've got Notre Dame. So Notre Dame enters the top 10 here at number 10, and I know some people aren't going to like this, and they think Georgia Tech, Vanderbilt, or BYU should be here, but I've got Notre Dame after a nice win over USC. And this was a very good win for Notre Dame. They won this game 34-24, and they played well. On the offensive side of the ball, they ran the ball extremely effectively, as Jeremiah Love ran for 228 yards and a touchdown, and Jadarian Price also ran for 87 yards and a score, plus he returned a kickoff for a touchdown. And Notre Dame as a team, they finished the game with 306 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on 7 yards per carry. Now, the passing game for Notre Dame wasn't amazing, as CJ Carr threw for a season low 136 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, although it really didn't make a huge difference with how dominant the run game was. And then the defense for Notre Dame, they also played well, and their defense is back. They started the year playing extremely poorly, but they just held a very good USC offense to just 24 points. They completely shut down their rushing attack and also forced 3 turnovers. But this was a really good win for Notre Dame as they convincingly beat a pretty good USC team. And it's also big for them in the college football playoff race because USC was the hardest team left in their schedule by far. And this also gives them a quality win as we head into the playoff race. But Notre Dame, after a nice win over USC, I've got them at number 10. Number 9, I have Texas Tech. So Texas Tech, they fall a couple spots to number 9 after they lost to Arizona State 26-22. Now, you could say I should drop Texas Tech a little bit further for losing to an unranked Arizona State team, but I don't want to penalize them too much because they were playing with their backup quarterback. They were on the road against what I think is one of the most underrated teams in college football. So I don't really want to punish Texas Tech too much for losing a close game on the road. But overall for Texas Tech this week, it wasn't a great performance, but it wasn't terrible. Their offense had their worst game of the season, but that's kind of expected when you're playing with your backup quarterback. And Will Hammond wasn't even terrible, as he threw for 167 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, plus he ran for a touchdown. Although Texas Tech, they couldn't get anything going on the ground, as they ran for just 109 yards. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Texas Tech also didn't have their best game, as they allowed a season high 26 points, and they had trouble stopping the pass, allowing 300 passing yards. But it's the first loss season for Texas Tech. As I said a minute ago, I don't want to drop them too much, but I do have Texas Tech falling from number 7 to number 9. Number 8, I have Ole Miss. So Ole Miss, they fall to number 8 after they lost their first game of the season, losing to Georgia by a score of 43-35. And Ole Miss, they had their chance to win this game. They were leading entering the fourth quarter, but then they did not play well in the final quarter, getting outscored 17-0. And in the fourth quarter, they had just 16 total yards. But this wasn't a terrible loss for Ole Miss. It wasn't great either, but they were still okay. Quarterback Trinidad Chambliss continued to play well, as he had 263 yards and a touchdown, and he also led the team with 42 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. And Ole Miss as a team, they did run for 4 scores, although had just 88 yards on the ground. Now, the problem for Ole Miss this week was their defense, as they allowed 43 points and over 500 yards, and they couldn't stop the run or the pass. But this was still a decent performance for Ole Miss. Going to Georgia is never easy, so losing a close game isn't the worst possible outcome, but I've got Ole Miss falling to number 8. 7th, I have Miami. So Miami drops to number 7 after they lost their first game of the season, in their loss to Louisville by a score of 24-21. And this was not a good game for Miami. On the offensive side of the ball, they could not run the football at all, as they ran for just 63 yards and 2 touchdowns on 2.6 yards per carry. And because they couldn't run the ball, that put more pressure on Carson Beck, and he was terrible, throwing 4 interceptions. And then for the defense for Miami, they weren't amazing, allowing 24 points and 367 total yards. Plus, they couldn't stop receiver Chris Bell, who caught 9 passes for 136 yards and got in the end zone twice. But this was not a great week for Miami. They lost their first game of the season, and if you want to drop them further than number 7, I understand it, but I do still think they should be a top 10 team because when looking at their complete resume, they do still have pretty good wins over South Florida and Notre Dame. but I've got Miami at number 7. Number 6, I have Georgia. So Georgia moves up to number 6 after they beat Ole Miss by a score of 43-35. And this was another good win for Georgia and another comeback win because they were trailing 35-26 entering the fourth quarter, but then in the final quarter they outscored Ole Miss 17-0. But this was a good performance for Georgia, especially offensively. Quarterback Gunnar Stockton played really well as he went 26 of 31 for 289 yards and 4 touchdowns, plus he also ran for 59 yards and another score. And then Georgia, they were great on the ground as they ran for 221 yards and a touchdown on 4.5 yards per carry. Now, the defense for Georgia wasn't amazing, allowing 35 points, and that's kind of been a problem for Georgia this season. They've definitely allowed some points this season, but when they need to come up big, they have. And that's exactly what happened again this week. They were great in the fourth quarter, forcing 2 3-and-outs and a turnover on downs, and that allowed Georgia to really get the win. But Georgia, after a good win over a good Ole Miss team, I've got Georgia at number 6. Number 5, I have Oregon. So Oregon, they move up to number 5 after a couple losses of the teams ahead of him. But Oregon, they also did their job as well, as they destroyed Rutgers, winning 56-10. And in this game, Oregon had 750 total yards. But this was a really good performance. Quarterback Dante Moore threw for 290 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. And Oregon was also insane on the ground, rushing for 415 yards and 4 touchdowns. And they also had 2 players run for at least 100 yards, as Noah Winnington ran for 125 and Jordan Davison ran for 100. And then the defense for Oregon, they also dominated. They allowed just 10 points, 202 total yards, and forced 3 turnovers. But this was a good bounce back win for Oregon after their loss to Indiana last week. And after this dominant win, I've got Oregon back inside the top 5 at number 5. Fourth, I have Alabama. So Alabama, they move up to number 4 after they easily beat Tennessee 37-20. And this was another good game for Alabama. The offense played well, and quarterback Ty Simpson continued to play at a high level, as he threw for 253 yards and 2 touchdowns. Although on the ground, Alabama wasn't amazing, but they got the job done, as they ran for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns on just 3.8 yards per carry. And then the defense for Alabama, they also played well. They held a good Tennessee offense to just 20 points, got 4 sacks, and forced a turnover, which they returned for a touchdown. But this was another good win for Alabama as they dominated a good Tennessee team, and they've now won 6 in a row after their season opening loss to Florida State, and their last 4 wins have all come against ranked teams. But another good win for Alabama, and I've got them at number 4. Third, I have Texas A&M. So Texas A&M, they move up to number 3 after they beat Arkansas in a shootout 45-42. And this was a solid performance for A&M. Their offense played really well with 45 points, and Marcel Reed had a great game, throwing for 280 yards and 3 touchdowns, plus he added 55 yards and a touchdown on the ground. And speaking of running the football, A&M did that extremely well, as they ran for 217 yards and 3 touchdowns, while averaging 6.2 yards per carry. Now, the offense was great for Texas A&M. The defense wasn't amazing, as they allowed 42 points, which is a season high, and they also allowed 8.1 yards per play. But while this wasn't the best win for Texas A&M, they still got the win. They're still undefeated. They're 7-0, and I've got Texas A&M at number 3. Second, I have Indiana. So Indiana, they move up to number 2 as a result of the Miami loss, but Indiana, they still played well, as they beat Michigan State 38-13. They got off to a little bit of a slow start, although that is kind of expected considering what they did last week, but then they woke up and they played well. Quarterback Fernando Mendoza threw for 332 yards and 4 touchdowns, and Indiana, they ran for 132 yards and a score on 4.7 yards per attempt. And then defensively, Indiana, they also dominated. They allowed just 13 points and also got 4 sacks. But another good performance for Indiana. They're now 7-0, and they're at number 2. And coming in at number 1, I've got Ohio State. So Ohio State, they've remained at number 1 after they dominated Wisconsin, winning 34-0. And this was another good win for Ohio State. Their offense played really well, especially through the air, as quarterback Julian Sain threw for 393 yards and 4 touchdowns. And wide receiver Carnell Tate had a big game, catching 6 passes for 111 yards and 2 scores. Now, the pass game was great for Ohio State. Their run game wasn't amazing, as they ran for just 98 yards on 3.5 yards per carry, but with how good the pass game was, didn't really affect the offense. And the defense for Ohio State, they were dominant once again. They shut out Wisconsin and held them to just 144 total yards. But this was another dominant win for Ohio State. They've remained undefeated, and I've got them at number 1. And here are my updated college football playoff predictions. So they actually remain the exact same as my playoff predictions from last week, but I'll just run through them real quick anyway. My 1 seed is Ohio State, 13-0, winning the Big Ten. 2 seed, I have Indiana at 12-1. 3 seed, I have Alabama at 12-1, winning the SEC. My 4 seed is still Miami at 12-1, winning the ACC. I still think Miami goes 12-1 and they win the conference. I know they don't control their own destiny in the conference right now, but I don't completely trust Virginia or Georgia Tech. I think they lose at some point. I think that allows Miami to get into the championship game. I think they win it, and it's still the 4 seed. My 5 seed is Georgia at 11-2. My 6 seed is Texas Tech at 12-1, winning the Big 12. So they're very similar to Miami. Obviously, they lost this week, but they still control their own destiny in the conference, and I still think they're going to win the conference and make the college football playoff. My 7th seed is Texas A&M at 11-1. 8th seed is Oregon at 11-1. 9th seed is Ole Miss at 10-2. 10th seed is Notre Dame at 10-2. 11th seed is Tennessee, also at 10-2. And my 12th seed is South Florida, the Group of 5 conference champion. But those are my Week 9 college football rankings and my updated college football playoff predictions. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn on notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.